Tad. We just need, never mind, we have quorum now.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. Are there any additions or corrections to the November minutes? Can I have a motion then to approve them as drafted?
Motion from Michael Kelly.
Thank you,
Seconded,
Michael.
Nathan Madden.
Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. Good. All right, any opposed, raise your hand. All right, fine, the minutes are approved. I want to move quickly to the first item of business that's on the agenda. And I want to make it clear that this particular item is coming from me. It is not coming from the staff, but there has been a proposal to reorganize the location of the Office of Environmental Quality. And my personal assessment of that is that it would be less effective to have the Office of Environmental Quality outside of the city manager's office. And there is a letter that that I've drafted. It's a starting point for some input to the mayor and members of city council, and also as a copy to the city manager, expressing my concern about the organizational effectiveness of the Office of Environmental Quality should it be moved out of the city manager's office. And I have highlighted what I would say is my aspiration for where we're headed, that we are going to become a more meaningful group going forward as we face the climate emergency that has been declared, but also highlighting the historical context. Some of us who've been around a long time know how hard we worked to get the Office of Environmental Quality in a place where it really could do interdepartmental coordination most effectively. And I feel that moving it out of the office of the city manager is a step back in the other direction. So with that said, I would like to call your attention to agenda item C, an attachment that you should have received with your agenda. And I would like to open discussion.
Yeah, Carol, I think that it's an elegantly written letter, and I would agree with your conclusions.
One of the things that is confronting us in this particular situation, and to the extent that we have guests listening in, is this is the kind of advocacy that that we probably would need support from other players in the community. And so we're hoping, I'm hoping, that we can lay out our argument clearly enough in the letter that we can engage some of the other environmental groups in the community and also advocating for the most effective organization for OEQ.
Hey, Carol, it's DJ. I'm sorry, I just got on a second ago. But I didn't want to piggyback up what you said and also kind of tell the group a little bit about our conversation this week, if that works with you.
Fine.
Okay. So, I think one thing that I was kind of caught off guard with this concept of moving OEQ to neighborhoods is, and sorry if this has already been repeated at the beginning, but OEQ does a lot more beyond just neighborhoods work. You think of the role they have in working with the planning department, procurement even, and just policing the city itself when it comes to its own policies. And so it doesn't really seem like a great fit for the work that's done there. And what you'd hate to see happen is that it falls under a department that, attempts to kind of curtail its mission to conform with what the department does rather than what OEQ is supposed to be doing.
So yeah, Scott, let me chime in. I have to admit I haven't had time to read the letter and digest this, but yeah, I agree with what DJ just brought up. It strikes me that, especially from the compliance side, that there's a lot more involved in neighborhoods. I mean, this is city leading on regional compliance issues.
Those of you, go ahead, Michael. Oh, who is that?
So yes, it is Michael. I was just going to say that I also agree that moving OEQ out of the city manager's office is concerning to me because I guess it's more because I don't know as much about the leadership within the neighborhood services department. Like as I see it, the city manager that we have currently does seem to have an eye towards really trying to do more with sustainability, to put it frankly. And I think that we're on a good trajectory. And part of the reason we're on a good trajectory is because he is supported by staff who are doing the work in their best capacity to support his abilities. And I don't think that becomes easier or more efficient if they're moved out from under his purview. So that would be another reason why I would have serious skepticism and reservations about this change in the organization of OEQ.
This is more of a question. This is Jensen. I don't know. It would be interesting to understand what the thinking of the city manager's office is, or the city manager, and if this is planned for any other offices, and why it was that neighborhoods was picked over, say, for example, health, or why putting the office in a department was picked rather than doing what certainly other like municipalities or local governments have done, where environmental quality is treated at a departmental level. So, I could envision a department that was health and environment. So those are some kind of questions that I would have.
So I can respond to that. The other divisions that have been proposed to be moved out of the city manager's office also would include 311, our action center, and I believe BizCare as well. I think was the other one, but other than that, and then to respond to the question about regulatory compliance, there was part of a proposal to move our compliance folks to Public Works and move the rest of the folks to neighborhoods. And I was able to kind of work with Brian and Forrest Decker to kind of make the argument that the staff needed to stay together. I felt that it was important that as a team, there's a lot of efficiencies that we've kind of built in where there's some overlap among the staff to support each other. They're all still environmental trained scientists, analysts, and whatever. And we've really been able to gather a lot of efficiencies between the two essential divisions of the office. So Staff preferred to stay together. I supported that and was able to kind of convince Brian and Forrest to make that happen. So I just wanted to clarify that aspect of it.
I would like to tap Jerry's memory. Historically, we went on a sort of long path to get to the manager's office. There was a time when the Office of Environmental Quality was actually a department. They were tied more closely with waste management and solid waste. And over time, as we took on more and more planning for climate change and other topics of interest, air quality, other environmental concerns in addition to waste management, it was decided gradually to move this to the manager's office, which to me seems like the best placement. Jerry, can you help kind of fill in the gaps of that transition?
To be real honest, I think the better recollection would be Andy, because he was there during that transition where I came in after that occurred.
Sure. I can kind of cover that real quick. Is in 1994, when the commission kind of got started as well, and the consent decree was put into effect to help create the Office of Environmental Management at the time. Back then, that office, those of us that had environmental backgrounds in the health department and public works were pulled into the new office, and that was in 1994. That office was housed in the city manager's office, so that's actually how it started. There was a consultant at the time that provided a guidance document to the city on how the structure of the environmental program should be set up, with a liaison relationship between all the departments, so that the regulatory compliance could be effectuated and efficiently kind of overseen. At that time, sustainability really wasn't at the forefront, other than conversations around solid waste and curbside recycling. After just but a couple of years, the Office of Environmental Management did become its own department. And that's at the time when we basically took in solid waste from Public Works. That was when we built the household hazardous waste facility. We had illegal dumping, code enforcement related to illegal dumping. And then just before Dennis came on board, that's kind of about right at the end of John Stufflebean's tenure in 2004, 2005, is when the new city manager decided to break up the department and send household hazardous waste to the water department, and solid waste went back to Public Works, or it might have went to neighborhoods. I don't recall exactly which one it went to, but that was the new city manager at that time saw the vision in consultation with Dennis Murphy to basically put the Environmental Quality Office back into the city manager's office. And that's where we've been since.
My request of the commission would be that you authorize us to go ahead and formally express generally the sentiment that's in this letter, that it would be appropriate for the Office of Environmental Quality to stay within the city manager's office, perhaps attached to an assistant city manager, and that we see the climate protection issues and climate resiliency and adaptation as emerging issues that require interdepartmental coordination above and beyond what might be accomplished from a division within a department. If those of you who have read the letter, if you are comfortable with it, I'd like to know that. If you have concerns, I would like to know that too. And so if you would kind of give me an indication of where you are and whether or not you want to move forward with a letter like this from the commission.
Carol, this is Nate. I just want to say that, yes, I am very comfortable with it. And at the risk of overreaching, is there a way that we can actually sort of ask for enhancements of the purview and scope of work for OEQ as sort of a, I don't know, it feels like what's happening here is someone wanting to do the appearance of doing something that is not actually doing something. It just, is shuffling the deck of cards a bit. And I mean, it feels like maybe we can actually express how the value of OEQ from our perspective by saying, not only do we think this shouldn't happen, we think you should be expanding their scope of work, as well as their purview and oversight in this, that, and the other set of activities.
I hear what you're saying. I would expect that the outcome of the current climate planning would actually do just that we're going to have some recommendations that would suggest that OEQ might undertake some additional activities. Jensen, I see you have your hand up.
I do. I sense the urgency, and so I want to be supportive of that. Does anyone have any idea what the vision behind putting OEQ in neighborhoods would be? Is there any possibility that the idea is to empower what OEQ is doing in the way that we are all here supporting, and giving it an entire department to do that in, a kind of a grassroots department to do that in, and flipping the entire script at neighborhoods? Does anybody know? I mean, what the vision is? Good, because my general reaction is to say that the current structure looks right, but I really don't know what the vision would be for changing it, and I wonder a bit about that.
So I can comment just briefly. I can't say I have a lot of details, and I'm not quite sure I understand the complete vision, but neighborhoods is trying to be redesigned under Forrest Decker. So the assistant city manager, Melissa Kazakowicz, and Brian feel that the neighborhoods department needs to be more accessible to the neighborhoods, to be more supportive of the neighborhoods. And I believe that they saw that our climate action, our climate activities more recently kind of lent them to believe that maybe this is a good fit for where OEQ belongs based on that. I did have a conversation with the assistant city manager about this, the pros and cons of this particular move. But as was mentioned earlier in this meeting, our office does do more than just in the neighborhoods. I mean, we have a benchmarking ordinance that deals with commercial entities. We have the regulatory compliance function. So, I mean, so I made the case, and this is still this is, as far as I know, the direction that they're going.
I see a hand up from Michael and DJ.
Yes. So I think another point of concern that I have is the vague mandate to better support neighborhoods, because and the concern that I'm bringing up here is that as much as I understand the need to support the work of neighborhoods, I think that it too often is placing too much of an emphasis on neighborhood associations alone, and that comes at the expense of tenants, of people who can't participate in their neighborhood associations, and of other key stakeholders in areas that aren't directly aligned with neighborhood associations. So even beyond just the general concern about pushing them over to neighborhoods, I think that there's also concerns that I have around what we're defining as who it is that they would be required to help.
Okay, I agree with you. I mean, obviously we want to serve the interests of the neighborhoods. But I see the role of OEQ as very much interdepartmental and across the broad spectrum of city activities. I have JS. Who's JS? Hand up. And Ben. Come on,
It's
whoever
Jerry
wants.
Schechter.
Jerry
Okay.
Schechter.
Jerry?
Yeah, just as a bit of background, a bit of information on a couple of, as most of you may be aware, the city has been a member for the last 14 years of what's referred to as the Heartland Sustainability Network, which covers about 6 states and 17 or 18 cities, all of whom have a position that's equivalent to Laura's position and Andy's. It's a little bit different in every city, but on 3 occasions, the last one being about 6 or 8 weeks ago before I left, we surveyed the sustainability managers or directors or whatever they were called in the different cities about where they are located in their city, within their city structure, and where they would prefer to be and why. And overwhelmingly on all 3 of the surveys that we did, including the last one, which was not as well responded to as the first 2 several years ago, there are some that are in their public works departments, there are some that are in their planning departments, et cetera. There are some in the mayor's office, as is the case in St. Louis, as an example, and there are some in city manager's office. And assuming that the city manager is supportive of climate change activities, across the board, there was sentiment in favor of the OEQ related function being in the city manager's office. There were a range of issues that came up in different cities with regard to what they felt they could not do given the department that they were in, whether that be public works or whatever. But of those 17 or 18 cities, the overwhelming sentiment has for a number of years been in favor, should it be able to be there, to be in the city manager's office for many of the reasons that have already been discussed this afternoon.
I see that DJ and Ben both have a hand up. One of you jump in.
Yep. So
yeah, go ahead, Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, what I was just going to say is that if we wanted to add also that it's a mutually constructive relationship between OEQ and the city manager. I mean, by definition, the stuff that's going to be coming down the chute from the climate protection and resiliency plan is going to be with the aim of increasing synchronicity and support between all these different departments. So, it's not just that OEQ can do a better job in the city manager's office, it's that they can actually help the city manager do their job better too.
DJ, did you want to add something too, please?
Yeah. So the other thing I'm going to add is that, and I know Jerry and Andy and Rachel probably can't say this to the city manager, but I mean, the truth is, and I say as a former city employee myself, is when something comes down from something attached to the city manager's office, people listen differently than if it comes down from a staffer within a department. And I think the critical nature of the issues that OEQ, works on is such that you do not want to be in a position where you're kind of being brushed off because of where you're parked now, that you wouldn't have been in had you stayed exactly where you are right now. And so I do think, again, that's not something maybe that Andy, or maybe you can, could bring up, but I do think, not only in our letter, but in promoting this with different advocacy groups to chime in, that they should note kind of the immediate effect of something that's handed down from where OEQ is at now, rather than where it could be.
Marty, did you want to add something?
Yeah, we don't need less power. We need all the power we can get.
And it seems to me that being in the city manager's office, you're closer to the power of making recommendations to everybody. And if I don't know how the building is set up, but if there's some interaction that goes on each time, there's information passed. There's just a whole lot. I wouldn't, they're trying to say go down to corner and wait. I mean, I don't mean that anybody's really trying to do that, but it's kind of like that. You're just moving us away from the seat of power as it occurs in the city, seems like.
Well, we don't need, if we are in general agreement, would you all could I have a motion to proceed with this letter and get it out and get it to the council ASAP?
So
and make our position public so that other advocates who might agree with us could weigh in?
Yes,
a motion to that effect?
Marty made a motion. This is Michael Kelly. I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will go ahead and expedite this letter and try to get it out tomorrow if we can. And that way it will be part of the public record. And if there are other environmental advocates that would like to weigh in, they will have the benefit of our opinion. All good?
Yep.
Okay. Let's move on. We have a guest who's going to talk to us about advanced KC, which is going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, and Rachel's going to do the PowerPoint for Carrie Tyndall, and I'll introduce Carrie Tyndall. She's one of our assistant city managers over economic development. And so Carrie, feel free to elaborate more so, but then I'll give Rachel a little time to queue up your presentation if you like, unless you want to run it yourself.
I can try and see if I can run it myself, which is probably easier for Rachel. But if it doesn't work, then maybe she can help me.
Sure. She's set up to do it either way.
Yeah, give me just a second.
Sure.
It looks like it's not liking that. So I'm going to go ahead and take Rachel up on her offer. Okay. Can you pull up the one for resolution 210919 first?
Yes, I will do that.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon or evening, everyone. My name is Carrie Tyndall, and as Andy said, I'm an assistant city manager who focuses in the area of economic development. So my role with the city is to assist in evaluating and making recommendations about incentive projects, coordinating efforts with the EDC of Kansas City, throw in a little bit of compliance issue on prior projects. And then I also help to advise mayor and council on policy related issues, along with some other folks at City Hall. But Just to kind of give you a high level background, if you're not familiar with Advanced KC is the city's strategic plan for economic development. It was originally adopted in 2012 approximately. And you can just leave it right there, Rachel. So it's been a while. We're getting close to, I think, 10 years of that having been in effect, and council priorities and things evolve over time. So we have been taking another look at the priorities that were set under that policy and also some of the processes. And council had directed staff to form a work group with the council, or a work group of representatives of the economic development ecosystem. So that includes developers, taxing districts, people in the banking industry, people in policy reform, et cetera. There's about 20 people on that committee, and they've been meeting for several months, I think, since the spring of this year, and are making recommendations to staff on potential improvements to both our policy and our processes. And so out of that group that's been meeting, we had some discussions about values related to economic development incentives. And so this resolution represents a recommendation from that committee to the city council of a set of purpose and value statements. Also directs the committee to evaluate and make recommendations pertaining to a couple of particular policy concepts, including incentive tiering, an equity scorecard, and a housing continuum. And that's partly because, you know, there's a chicken or an egg here when it comes to policy development. If the committee is not clear on what the council's general vision is, then they could be making recommendations that don't have likelihood of success or that don't meet overall big picture goals. So they wanted a little bit of clarification from council as far as on values. But if you can kind of go to the next. So I already covered this. This is just a summary of the kind of representatives on the committee. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so kind of why is this needed? And this pertains to both the policy that I'm going to share with you all, as well as this set of purpose and value statements. But it's important for us to have a shared purpose when we are talking about an economic development incentive, so we're all moving in the right direction and there's some consensus or agreement on the goals and objectives that we are seeking to achieve. This collaboration and facilitates effective decision making, because as a staff person or as a developer, it's important for us to have clarity about what the council's desired outcomes are so that we can implement things effectively. And it helps us to direct future policy recommendations and shapes our implementation activities. You can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick little quote that says, when your values are clear, making decisions becomes easier, right? So that's kind of high level why we're doing this. So someone in the chat had said, can you go back to the members of the committee? So if you could go back, Rachel, yeah, we can pause on that for a minute. So there are 21, it kind of comes and goes. We've had some people that have had to step away because of work commitments, but when it was originally formed, there were 20-ish members, and those include redevelopment agencies. So we have some folks from EDC, we have John Stevens from the Port Authority, we have representatives of KCPS School District, we have the Mental Health Levy District on there. We have some folks from the construction industry. We have some folks from Ride KC and from Swope Community Builders and some community organizations like that, and then community advocacy. So we have, for example, a representative of KC Tenants and also of the Economic Development Incentive Reform Group. They kind of go by KC TIF Watch, but it's basically that group. And there is actually a complete list of all the members is on our project website, and I can provide that in the chat later for anybody that wants to follow along with the project or get more information. I always get asked this question, well, why isn't this person on this committee, or why was this person on it? And the short answer is 20 too little and too many simultaneously. So it is a small enough group that we are able to have regular dialogue with a consistent set of members, and it's representative of a lot of the major perspectives that we work with on a regular basis on economic development projects, but it is not inclusive of every perspective. And so one of the things that we did recently was conduct a series of focus groups where we expanded our outreach to other technical experts in the community in similar areas as well as others. And so I think Benjamin Proffer, who I see on the call, was one of the folks who participated in one of those focus groups recently. And that's full transparency here in recognition of the fact that there are a lot of voices that need to weigh in on policy issues related to economic development. And, we want to certainly do more. More is more. Staff is always available and game for community outreach, but we do have a limited time frame for staff to come back to council with recommendations and financial resources to do things like community organizations. So that's kind of who is on there. And Rachel, can you pull up the other presentation? Because that's basically kind of the who's involved and why we did it and kind of what its purpose is. But the other piece of legislation right now that's before council is an ordinance. And what this ordinance does, and if you can go to the next slide, Rachel. Oops, I lost it. Yeah, so this is the one that updates the city's currently adopted EDI policy, Economic Development and Incentives Policy. So when Advanced KC was originally prepared, so it was a strategic plan, it made recommendations, and at that time, the City Council adopted a series of priorities that were contained within this Ordinance 140031. It adopted an Advanced KC process evaluation or evaluation process or workflow, and it adopted a scorecard. And so now that we've gone through this, I will call it Advanced KC 2.0 process, which is, I would describe as probably a strategic planning light process. We have gotten a lot more feedback from this group of civic leaders as well as focus groups. We've conducted a bunch of online surveys and gathered feedback there, but also we had the opportunity this spring to conduct interviews one-on-one with the City Council and survey them to find out kind of what were the priorities of the current group of elected officials. And so primarily based on council's interviews this spring, but I would say not unconsidering, that's a double negative. We also considered obviously all of the other input that we've gotten. I mean, I'm the staff person that's been receiving a lot of this information and conducting these interviews. So it kind of goes all into, my experience and my set of information. And so I can't necessarily say that they don't influence one another because it's all in there and I've had all of these conversations. But this particular piece of legislation is largely focused around feedback specifically from the council. And if you can go to the next slide. Again, kind of why is this needed? Why are we updating this policy? The one that was adopted in 2012 has served the city well, and it provided a lot of really important guidance to staff, but council priorities and community conditions do evolve. And also, I think that there are new topics today that are very important that were not necessarily on the radar of council at that time. And so we want to make sure that that stuff gets incorporated. And I have to apologize if you guys could give me just 1 minute and give me a second. I am getting a low battery alert on my laptop, and I'm realizing that my plug is not plugged in and I don't want to lose you. So can we just hold for just 1 second?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. COVID times, right? I'm sharing an office with my husband and sometimes he unplugs stuff and doesn't tell me. Sorry about that. So part of the reason why we're updating this is to acknowledge and recognize some of those current conditions and focuses of policy discussion, but then again, also providing clarity for developers, businesses, and folks that are seeking incentives so that we understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. And if you could move to the next one, Rachel. The currently proposed ED&I policy update includes 6 focused areas: economic growth, creation of quality jobs, development generally, residential development, commercial and industrial development, and then some issues related to fiscal responsibility. If you can go to the next one, please. Basically, in terms of changes from the currently adopted policy, this policy requires alignment with other strategic plans. So, for you all, the climate and resiliency plan would be considered a strategic plan, but there are also other strategic plans of the city, like the health improvement plan, the housing policy, our transit-oriented development policy, our citywide business plan, our comprehensive plan, et cetera. And so this one requires alignment with those other plans in recognition of the fact that economic development is influenced by a lot of other policy of the city, and we need to be consistent. It also provides more specific priorities for different asset classifications. And by asset, I mean kind of real estate development types. So that includes residential development, commercial development, industrial development, and jobs. Previously in the old policy, it was just kind of site development, but there really are different needs and different issues depending on these different asset classifications. So we've tried to break that out a little bit more. We are attempting to be more people focused. So I think you all probably have heard the terminology triple bottom line in your circles. The way that I look at that sometimes is people, prosperity, and place. And so we had a lot of place-based direction in our old policy and a lot of things related to economic growth and job prosperity, but how it was impacting individual residents and workers was not strong in the policy.
Bag hanging. I didn't mean to squish it. They're oranges. I'm saving the seeds.
Thank you. And also, I think that we are attempting to indicate kind of what we would measure. The updated priority areas that we've tried to add include statements related to job access, transit-oriented development, parking, historic preservation, an appropriate supply of different types of asset classifications, defining quality jobs more specifically through things like livable wages, trying to be more specific about sustainable construction and resource efficiency. If you could go to the next slide. This is kind of, I won't go into this, that's kind of the end of the overview of it. The rest of these slides just kind of list what's in the exhibit, which I understand was attached to the agenda. So you guys have all had a chance to see that. So basically, in summary, we've got two pieces of legislation. This is at a very high level in the strategic planning process. We're really trying to just kind of get an overall direction set with council about what do we value and what are we trying to accomplish. And there will be future work related to development of specific strategies and policy recommendations and how these things ultimately get measured. But we need to address these issues at this high level kind of before we get to that more level of specificity. And so this is scheduled to come before the City Council on the 12th of January, again, in the Neighborhoods and Planning Committee. And they have seen it for a while, for a few weeks. It's been out there, and it's been kind of circulated to the community through our community dialogue. But you know, the purpose of that really is to receive public comment and improve it. So this is just a starting point for that discussion, and we're seeking perspectives on, you know, whether or not these are the right things or if they can be improved. So I think that for me as the staff person that's working on this project, you know, what I would really appreciate from this group is some opportunity to benefit from your technical expertise in the area of climate resiliency and environmental sustainability. Those are not areas where I necessarily have my own specific technical expertise. So I feel like the initial draft of this is a little bit weak in that area and definitely could benefit from being strengthened. But since it's not my area of expertise, I didn't feel confident making statements about what should be in there. Because of the fact that we are trying to align with so many different strategic plans, you know, I don't think that our aim is to try and replicate the goals of every single plan that we're trying to align with. But what I'm seeking is to have high level alignment with multiple plans so that we don't have to read every single plan of the city for every single project that we do, but that our policy and our general direction is aligned with these plans at a very high level, and then we can incorporate those concepts into some kind of a balanced scorecard that we can use to evaluate individual projects. So that's, I guess, probably a conclusion of my general overview of kind of where we're at and what's going on with these pieces of legislation. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
I think it would be helpful maybe if some of the commissioners would express some of the kinds of things that we talk about and share some of the ideas that we've had. One thing that we've talked about over and over is that we would like to see the projects that receive special funding consideration be ones that are environmentally responsible, that comply with the best possible practices as far as clean energy and just in general. I'm gonna, Benjamin has his name up. Ben?
Yeah, so Carrie, just to go back to the very beginning slide that you have, Well, one of them, you said that there was one of the core missions was to create incentive tiering, equity, scorecards, and housing continuum. Are those going to be documents, those first three that you referred to?
So those are really kind of what I would call big ideas that have emerged out of these conversations at the committee level. They were not something that council initially directed us to undertake, but as we were having conversation about kind of what was working and what wasn't working relative to economic development incentives in general, thought was that if we had more certainty for developers, a more simple and straightforward process, and clearer priorities about where we want to incentivize development and what types of development that we want to incentivize, that would help to ensure that the type of projects we are targeting our public dollars to are going towards projects that we would consider good or quality projects, right? So kind of finding that stuff up front. And so that's kind of what the tiering proposal is really focused on. The equity scorecard is more of our part of our conversation about how do we score projects. So currently we have a scorecard that we use for jobs projects, and then a scorecard we use for redevelopment projects. And it measures things like investment level, job creation, geographic location, wages that are being offered, and what the relative quality of those jobs are. It does currently include some things about whether or not projects are, environmentally credentialed or not, but the amount of points that are allocated to that specific factor are relatively small because they're part of a comprehensive set of criteria. And so the equity scorecard is a model that some other cities have experimented with that aims at integrating what I will call soft community benefits into evaluation of projects for incentives, more focused around how we're affecting downstream quality of life for residents. Sure. And I shared an example of one from Minneapolis with Andy, just as an example. And he's shared with me some other ones that you all may be familiar with as well. But basically, the concept is we're currently scoring things on I would call it a pretty traditional paradigm related to economic development. And we're really wanting to, look at proposing council, look at projects a little bit more along a triple bottom line kind of matrix. And so they're doing some thinking about what are the appropriate criteria to get that kind of a balanced scorecard developed for consideration of economic development projects. And I would say that all of those things are going to be topics that we'll be discussing before the end of the year. But what I envision coming out and coming back to council with is a portfolio of recommendations. And that may come in the form of multiple individual pieces of legislation that would come forward after the first of the year.
Right. Okay. So those are like three big ideas areas, but I was delighted to see them because each one of them could be a publication. Like each one of them looks like something that you would have multiple experts working on community engagement with, and then putting together a document to create incentives tiering based off of places in the community and neighborhoods that have traditionally been economically neglected, or areas where there are community programs that you can help either create or support to increase the local economy as you're developing the city itself. So what you're saying is that those were big ideas, but they're not going to be fleshed out at this point. Is that right?
I'm not sure what you mean by this point. What I will say is that I have 2 more committee meetings before the work of the committee is concluded. And then at that point, it's going to fall upon staff to take that information and come back to council with recommendations. I would say that really represents the beginning of a conversation, though, and not the end of a conversation, because in my experience, it's very effective to bring something forward to the council and to the community to react upon, so that there's a specific focus to those discussions. Economic development is just a really broad topic. And so if you don't have some kind of framework for that discussion, it can get really convoluted very quick and complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not entirely sure that what I will bring forward to council will be one policy recommendation, right? There's no single magic bullet to doing effective economic development. There's probably a multitude of strategies. And so those three that I identified are some that the committee has already identified, but there are other things that I've discussed with the city manager that are likely to come forward too. And what I would be looking for is a process whereby we put something forth and then we have an extended public comment period with potentially additional community outreach, so that then we get feedback on specific recommendations or a specific policy.
Yeah. So what my intention for asking those questions was to say that those are really exciting areas that deserve to have a lot more time and effort put into creating them in the first place. And from our perspective and from my work on this commission and just personally, you know, in terms of standards for public green spaces, tree infrastructure, you know, rain gardens, energy efficiency buildings, and that kind of thing, we're looking towards developing some kind of comprehensive vision of what that would look like in the first place. And so a tiering system, in which you would say, all right, it meets these benchmarks of efficiency. I mean, you know, just taking passive houses like the NA Plus Ultra, like the ultimate top tier kind of energy efficiency that you can get, you know, that would deserve the highest amount of support from the city, and then go down from there. But you know, that would be in line with the equity scorecard and probably a helpful component to it. Hold on, I'm going to turn on the lights in my office for just 1 second.
Okay,
It got
Ben,
dark in here.
we have a couple other hands up. So,
Yeah, let me just say one more thing. So
okay.
what I meant by that is that, you know, as the equity scorecard and the energy efficiency is not separate in my mind. And I think that, as Carol has said many times, and I know Casey tenants would agree, that a dwelling that you can't afford to live in terms of energy and utilities isn't an affordable place to live. So, you know, from our perspective, an equity scorecard would include those sustainable considerations, would include trees, would include native plant life to increase the health of the entire environment and the neighborhood as a whole. So yeah, developing those three very important documents or standards would be my recommendation, and including those considerations in that development.
Yeah, and I appreciate that very much, Ben. Is it okay if I call you Ben, or do you prefer Benjamin? Ben. Okay. And I think when I talked to Andy before today's meeting, I think what I told him is that, you know, a lot of the things that we would want to see in development, we want to see in development regardless of whether or not it's incentivized or not. But, and I was reviewing the, I think the resolution about climate emergency before the meeting. And, you know, to me, when I read that, it absolutely 100% makes so much sense, but I feel like I need a set of standards to refer to so that I can identify a quality project that we are seeking to potentially incentivize. So to the extent that that's going to be something that may come out of the climate resiliency plan itself, I think will be helpful, because I wouldn't know, you know, a rain garden from a rain barrel. You know, that's probably not a very good, funny joke or good metaphor,
Oh,
but
it works. It works.
I'm just, you know, I can help you pick out a mean pair of pumps, but I don't know if that's my area of expertise.
Well, we can have a little exchange.
We have a couple other hands up, and I'd like to give them a chance to talk. Is it Michael and Scott? Is that who's got their hands? I can't. You guys have to help me.
Yeah, I've got mine. Michael, if he's ready, I think his was
Marty's
probably
hands up.
first.
It's Marty, not Michael.
Ah, sorry. Marty. and then
Okay.
Scott.
Well, first of all, I'm not enamored with economic development, nor am I very enamored with economic growth. I don't know how many billion people there are on the planet right now. We don't really need growth. We need to redesign what we've already got, and attracting a business that is just highly destructive to the environment, and attracting that to our city is not something I want at all. And if you need to attract other people, you know, we could redevelop within the population that we already have. Just make the dollars go around within the city more, and you don't have to be closed to others. But you know, the whole thing of economic, the business community has really raped the planet and raped other people's. That's how we got the standard of living that we're dealing with, that's been killing us anyway. So these things have to be looked at, to me, as you progress. What is progress? You know, there's a lot of horse manure out there, and it's not being composted. Thank you.
Okay, Scott.
Okay, so yeah, you presented a lot of stuff that you know, I'm the engineer in the group, so I can't follow most of it. But one idea that came to my mind, I know you were trying to lean on this group for a little bit of tech support, you know, in these areas. So, you know, I'm kind of a guy that gets into the, you know, the details of measurements, that sort of thing. So there's some, you know, when you're looking at how to rate a project for greenhouse gas production, for example, or sustainability things, EMC's been presented to a couple times by a group, a Kansas City startup called Dynamics, which has some software that they lease for doing greenhouse gas evaluations, carbon footprinting for municipal governments and companies to balance, you know, or come up with an estimate of carbon footprinting if they make certain changes. And they cover a range of sectors from transportation to, you know, fuels and all. I think they do trees. I don't know all the ins and outs, but they're just one example. I'm thinking the current group that the city is doing the climate protection plan with, the Brendel Group Consulting. I think they may have some similar tools that could possibly be leaned on. I would guess that Laura or Andy might be closer to that. But there's some, you know, some things like that could, you know, possibly be something that you guys could cross department boundaries and stuff to get some time and some technical substance behind. I don't know if any of that hits the mark, or is it all what you were after, but those were my thoughts.
Scott.
I would love to take a look at those offline and have a discussion with Andy about that. One idea that kind of strikes me as you're describing that, Scott, is that currently on ordinances that we have that go before the city council, there's a requirement that we have a fiscal impact and a fiscal note, so that council knows what the fiscal impact is of a request. And I don't know enough your the division's discussions with council about how to evaluate development projects, but there's a whole lot of different types of evaluations that we need to do, and some of them are more technical and probably merit someone with technical expertise in that area weighing in and doing that evaluation versus it being me who doesn't know anything about this area. So, Andy, we could talk about that offline about whether or not that might be a joint recommendation from the two of us to start adding an environmental note to certain types of development projects over a certain size or whatever as a way to get that type of assessment done.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talked about before, I think, the climate protection plan will have its recommendations, and those recommendations that you're gathering, we'll come back and revisit those in the new year and flesh those out into some type of initiatives that we can take on.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I told Andy before this meeting is what would really be helpful to me is I'd like to have like 1 to 3 policy statements specific to environmental resiliency, climate resiliency that I can add to the proposed EDI policy that's before council right now, so that we have some recognition of that as a priority generally. I need to make sure that it's a balanced set of policy objectives and that we're addressing things like affordable housing and fiscal responsibility as well. So, that's probably about, the ideal number of specific policy statements, but that would be helpful to me.
So is that something that you need before you go back to the council in January? That's what you're looking at for that. Well, maybe we could have a small work group that would talk about that and maybe get you some feedback. We could work with Andy. Does that, do I have volunteers? Jensen, I see your hands up.
I'd be glad to help with that. And I think what that process yields, we ought to capture and think about including as a regular piece of the annual report that the EMC publishes. That's something also for you to carry to look at, is that we, this last year, we would have put out a report that makes recommendations to the mayor and council and city manager's office. I don't know that any of them off the top of my head were development oriented, but we could, now that we know that we've got this interest, we could target part of our writing of that report to this. Obviously, it doesn't help in the next month, so we'll have to do a small group first.
Are there other people besides Jerry? I see your hands up.
Yeah, Carrie, I would refer you to the comments I put in the chat for you. The larger of the two basically is how this group has taken into consideration Resolution 20-0005, which sets very specific and aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets, which includes energy efficiency, renewable energy, et cetera. That's a direction that this staff is working with, that OEQ staff is working with, and it would be a shame if economic development policy would in some respects work in opposition to the direction we have from City Council. It is a council resolution. It affects everything that we're doing. And I'd like to see, as an example, that if there's a checklist that we have a checklist there, that there's a written commitment from the applicant that says they will comply with our energy empowerment program by submitting their energy use data in our benchmarking program. So there's a written requirement for compliance, and that so there's other things that are in the chat that I won't go into, but really it was how this process complies with that resolution that governs a lot of what the OEQ staff is doing now.
I think I'm hearing you and I am processing and I understand. I didn't hear a question in there, Jerry. I think you were trying to just make that point, so I'm aware.
Yeah, it was, my question really was explain how this process has taken resolutions like that into consideration?
Well, I will tell you, it is a challenge for me or any staff person to take into consideration any resolution, because as you know, we have hundreds and thousands of them. And so one of the things that I have been doing and that I'm working on right now with the law department is to centralize and codify existing economic development policy so that it's easier for others like yourselves to be aware of policies that we've enacted, right, that you want to be consistent with. So, that's another area I think where Andy and I can collaborate, is that as we're codifying economic development policies, if there are pieces of environmental policy that are relevant to development, then perhaps those could get incorporated into that codification so that it's all part of the rules and regs and everybody knows it and is aware of it and it's easy to find.
So I'd like to put my hat in the ring to be on that working group if we're going to have it for Carrie's policy recommendations. But I also don't know that, just thinking about the standards and the type of plan that you're looking for, the environment is different and every neighborhood is different. I mean, I'm not sure that you're going to have the same kind of standard that you would for a fiscal note that you would for an environmental note, because you would want to look at the natural resources that exist already, and you would want to look at the landscape that exists already and the development that's already happened and the cycle of the community. If there's, one of the things that we talk about is that if redevelopment is already going to happen, or if development is in the wings, that's the most opportune time to get in there. And that's why we're having this conversation, to create some kind of focus for that. But I almost think it has to piggyback off of the equity side of it, so that you look at specific neighborhoods so that you can find out where the money in that development and redevelopment is going to do the most good, and then look at the natural resources and then see how far you can push it from there, and the correct human infrastructure that exists to be good stewards of whatever natural resources you put in there, and the engineering side of it too.
I'm going to interrupt just quickly and point out Nate, right? Nate, is that your hand up? And Michael? Yep. And I have 3 others that are a mystery to me. So let's quickly give Nate and Michael a chance to talk.
Yeah, Carrie, thanks for this presentation. And I think there's been some good recommendations from the committee so far, especially Scott has really articulated some of that substance that you're thinking of. I wanted to just hop in on a methodological point. When you're building a scorecard, and you made a comment about this earlier, when you build a scorecard, the score you get is a result of obviously the factors that you include and how they're weighted. And it sounded like the environmental sort of carve out on the current scorecard was limited to a certification. And that it's always, the environmental concern will always get washed out as a result of that. So like, if you want to take this approach, like you're going to have to include, it's going to have to be a heavier weighting and a variety of factors, which I don't know if anyone, including yourself, has the stomach for, to sort of really balance it out to that, to get a score that's going to equate to a project that is environmentally conscious, because you have not only like the labeling of or certification of buildings, you have like what's their carbon footprint, as Scott mentioned, you have what's their impact on the landscape, like Ben's mentioned, you also have like what's their capacity to generate renewable electricity. That there's a whole array of factors to take into considerations. And I think that if you're going to if you're really looking to embed it, and this is me agreeing with Ben, you really want to I think that equity is inherently tied to the environment. And if you're talking about building an equity component to this, you would want to include that as a sort of really large component in that equity scorecard piece, because it's part of it's part of the larger overall system within which all these other factors play out.
Yep, thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, Michael? Who is MK?
Yes, it's Michael this time.
Okay.
Carrie, I do apologize. I did miss your presentation, but I did have a chance to look at the priorities, and I mean, one thing that I would generally like to see, and I think that it's something that kind of noting a little bit to Ben's point about being careful about not doing something that's too germane or kind of too cookie cutter. Having more language in there about specifically supporting efforts to use other modes of transportation. Like I know there's a lot of language around building near transit and building near multimodal options, but I think trying to find ways to actually incorporate those multimodal, like end of trip facilities into these things that are being built. So like things like bike racks, lockers, showers, and additional lighting for things like pedestrians would also be something to consider as well. I know that there will be an effort to develop specific recommendations, but that would be one thing that I think would be nice to include with new development as well.
Yeah, and one just little caveat that I will say to everyone is that I am a jack of all trade and a master of none, right? So I rely upon a team of experts in other areas, and a lot of what we've been talking about today is related to design, and so I don't aim to be nor claim to be the expert on some of the things that you're talking about, which are very meritorious of having evaluated. I think that what I probably need is this to be an issue that is vetted through our normal design review process, because if there are standards for development established that are for the aim of the goals that this group is focused around, it's easy for me then to reference back to those, requirements and build things like that into standard contracts. So I think that they should be standards really for development generally. And so our zoning code should be updated to reflect some of the things that you guys are talking about. And that's a little bit outside the scope of my project that I'm working on, but it's obviously something that the city can have a policy impact on.
Thank you very much, Carrie.
Let's plan to, Andy, would you see if you could convene the work group sometime next week?
Yeah, we can look at that. I'll put out an invitation for that.
Okay, I think that would be good. And people who want to participate in the discussion, we'll do that.
I would want to say one more thing.
Sure, Marty, where are you?
Somewhere.
Ah, there you go.
Okay. This point about economic growth, I think really needs to be considered whenever somebody's new is coming to town, a new company, and we always talk about the growth as being a positive value. And I think it needs to be looked at. I think perhaps another phrase rather than growth. We're pushing the limits of the earth, and this whole idea of continued growth is antiquated, and we need to have a recycled economy rather than and I don't mean by just recycled goods. I'm just talking about the whole vision of it needs to be more picking up the people that are not doing so well and figuring out ways that they can do small things and provide some income for themselves. So anyway, I would really like to see something like that happen, because right now it seems to me that the environmental problem that seems to be most destructive is people going after riches, economic growth, and when you do that, you rip off people's as your labor force, and you rip off the environment. And if that's not really taken into consideration, and if there isn't somebody really looking at that, and you know, just do what you can. Thank you. You got it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your time. I know you have a hard job, and it's a lot to weigh and a lot to balance. We will do our best to provide you with some input that will be useful to you before your January 12th deadline.
Karen, oh, sorry, Carrie, I had a question in the chat just real fast. So after the climate protection and resiliency plan is published, is there any avenue for amending the scorecard or adapting it after that's published?
There is no prohibition on making modifications to the scorecard, subject to, council's willingness to do so.
Right.
I would say that it would be most effective if we could integrate things on the front end while we're making this very substantial, push to, update it, and that it is not good when we change rules frequently. So it would be better to do it now than later. I understand that you maybe don't have all of the answers to all of the questions, but again, kind of one of the things that I said earlier, the policy discussion right now is pretty high level, and we haven't really gotten into individual strategies. And the scorecard itself will probably not lend itself to a very deep focused analysis on environmental issues. So I think maybe what we need to look at is some advancement of the ball down the field, right? And making sure that it's in the consideration, that it is at a level of consideration that is appropriate for this issue relative to the other policy issues of the council. And then as we start to formulate strategy and as we start to work on the implementation of some of that policy, hopefully you guys will be further along and we can just kind of make administrative modifications that will help us align more and more over time.
Understood. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, I have a note that Ben, Jensen, and Nate all want to participate in the working group. If there are other people that specifically want to participate, please indicate in the chat, but Andy will make it open to everyone. And so we will provide notice. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Carrie, for coming and for sharing. We get it that what you're doing is hard.
Thank you, Carrie.
Have a good evening. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Andy, do you want, or is Laura going to do the report on the progress on the plan?
Did you want to approve minutes if we still have quorum?
We did approve the minutes.
Oh, okay. I must have stepped out on that. All right. Laura, you ready?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So since our last meeting, there has been a lot of behind the scenes work going on with the climate protection and resiliency plan. Brindle has been hard at work taking all of the strategies that we heard from the online meeting or the online meetings, the in-person strategy sessions, the climate stories, the climate mapping, everything that we've been doing as far as reaching out to community. They've been compiling those into a set of strategies, and we have at this time, they've narrowed it down to 23 strategies that Kansas City has residents and experts, subject matter experts have picked through this process. And these are kind of the 23 strategies that we have to work from. We have about 200 action items total throughout each of these strategies based on what we've heard from community. And so what we're going to do next is our strategy prioritization meetings are coming up next week, actually. So if you had wanted to sign up for one of those meetings and hadn't done so yet, now would probably be the time. And we will be sort of prioritizing the strategies in order of how. So pretty much all 23 of these strategies are going to be included in the plan going forward, unless it comes out of the strategy session that they are not needed, that when we're actually working through it, we find it's not worth the bang for our buck from a economic standpoint and a greenhouse gas reduction or co-benefit standpoint. Then it may be eliminated, but chances are these are going to be the 23 strategies that are included in the plan. And if additional ones do come up, then they will probably be added to the plan as well, and based on these strategy sessions. So if you see something missing in each of these areas that you think should be a higher overarching strategy, might be a good idea to join those strategy work groups next week. From then, what we're going to be doing in those work groups is there's a strategy, there was a strategy scorecard for each of these. Did my screen change for you guys? Are you guys seeing the strategy scorecard now? Okay, I know last time we had trouble with some folks being able to see it, so I just wanted to make sure. So what Brindle has already done is kind of rank the various strategies based on their carbon emission reduction, their mitigation cost effectiveness, resilience to primary climate risks. So that's our, is it helping us with flooding? Is it helping us with heat? Is it helping us with resilience to other climate impacts? And then ranking for promoting co-benefits. And so that they've added score points for whether or not it, here's our co-benefits here, whether or not it helps with economic recovery, carbon sequestration, health and wellness or health and well-being, and then environmental justice. So they're scored on that co-benefit as well. And then they're ranked also on technical feasibility. So if we can actually do this right now, of course, it got a high score. If the technology to do this particular strategy does not exist, there's a pretty low score. So they've already kind of given it a preliminary ranking. And then the next step is to work through these the strategy meetings for each particular topic area and figure out what between us as the city and then other organizations throughout the community can actually accomplish short-term, near-term, so near-term, medium-term, and long-term towards the end of 2040. So kind of ordering how those strategies are going to be done. Those are expected, those are all going to be happening the week of the 13th. I'll drop in the link to the playbook site where you can register and see when those various meetings are. And after that, then Brindle will get those strategies ranked and put into a draft plan for us. We've already reached out to the Climate Protection Steering Committee to get their input into what we need to include. They got to see a draft of the actual plan itself and then kind of an outline of how it was going to look and make some comments on that. So Brenda will be taking those into consideration as well as the comments from staff. And when we have a draft plan in hand, then we will make sure to get that out to you all for your input as well. And I think that's my update right now on the climate plan. Any questions? Thanks again to all of those who showed up and participated in the strategy sessions. We really appreciate you guys.
Andy, are you ready with the OEQ report?
Yes, I am. Okay, so this is kind of an update of a variety of projects that we've been talking about over the past year. So start off with the LED streetlight conversion project. The steering committee or the selection committee met last week, and we reviewed, we've reviewed the bids, done the financial analysis and all that, and it looks like we are moving forward in that process. So I can't speak to what the results were of that yet, that will come out in the normal process of going to council with an ordinance for our recommendation. So stay tuned. I can't speak to the specifics at this point. I can say that we are still moving forward with a demonstration project. There will be one in the Southland, one in the Northland. The specifics on that demonstration project will also be released probably in concert with our going to council with an ordinance. So I will, of course, share those that information as it rolls out. I spoke at the last meeting about revisiting the nuisance code and natural landscaping and how that relates. Have not been able to get that meeting set up yet, so I'm still looking to reach out to some of you interested folks and the stakeholders on that. So we haven't forgot about it. Just kind of with the climate planning and everything else, and Jerry's retirement, it's of course slowing us down in some areas, and particularly in this case on my desk. So looking to set up something in the new year, probably in the first couple of weeks of January, where we'll get the process started at revisiting the nuisance code and seeing what we can do to address the natural landscaping issues. So stay tuned. I'm going to try to reach out to folks this week and next to try to get some time set up next month to start that process. Energy code is also.
Andy?
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, this is Jerry. You indicated in the demonstration projects, one Northland, one Southland. When you say that, does that include the core city, or is it farther south, or what? Southland, south of the river, is a pretty big area.
Yeah, it'll just be a single site in the south of the river. I can't recall exactly whereabouts it is, but it's centrally located. I believe it's off of Troost, maybe. I just can't recall exactly. I haven't seen the map for a while now. So like I said, the details will be released on where that is. But we just had, interestingly enough, to do the demonstration, they had to order the bulbs to start the installation so that they can kind of get ready. So they settled on only two sites, one north and one south. So, but I can't recall the site of the second one. Sorry about that, Jerry.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll share it as soon as they release the map. That will be shared with everybody, and communications will take the lead on getting word out and communicating out to the public in terms of if there's interest of folks wanting to go take a look at the types of bulbs that we're talking about. Energy code, just to bring everybody up to speed, Greg Franzen has retired from the city, so we have a new building official now, and that is Jeff Lee. Jeff has been with the department for several years, has worked with Greg for a number of years as well, so he's pretty versed in the code. It's on his desk at this point. He's working through the trying to draft the ordinance for the 2021 IECC, and don't think he's quite there yet. And I don't suspect it's going to go to council this month. I think right now we've got another week or two, and then they're going to be on break again. So it's looking to me it's going to probably slip into January before council gets an ordinance for the new energy code. But I know he's working through it as best as he can, and of course city planning is still kind of dealing with some staffing issues and trying to bring people on board and trained and all that, which is been a kind of a struggle for all the departments, frankly. So anyhow, as far as I know, it's still moving forward though. Last thing I guess I'll mention, and then I'll take any questions if you have any, just an announcement that we were approached by Rocky Mountain Institute to see if we had interest in participating in their Solarize 2022 cohort, and having conversations with Rocky Mountain Institute. The idea of the Solarize campaign is to basically bring solar installations, solar panel systems to low-income communities. So the general idea, and there's a lot of questions still to be fleshed out, but essentially the idea is for the city to basically procure the solar panels so that we get a bulk group discount. And of course, we would try to garner support and kind of a sign-up process through the campaign. And then the city procures the services of a solar installation company that will offer the installations at a discount price. So that's the general broad brush strokes of the program. So we were selected as one of the communities to participate in that. I did say I think it would be a great thing for us to try to do this here in Kansas City. It would kind of also go along with the city manager's efforts to try to bring solar up at the airport. So we just kind of thought there was some synergies here that we could try to kind of dovetail on. So anyways, the cohort won't start until January of next year. The cohort includes other cities like Oklahoma City, Columbus, Ohio, Honolulu, Pensacola, Florida, El Paso. So we've got, I think there's 7 or 8 of us in the cohort, and I'm kind of looking for suggestions. I have time still to kind of bring others into the project to kind of participate on the cohort. So I'm kind of looking for frontline CBOs to participate. So if there are any suggestions, I'd welcome to take those, where I could reach out and have a conversation to see if they'd be willing to join on the cohort, which would be about a 3 to 4 hour commitment, probably monthly. And Rocky Mountain Institute is offering kind of an honorarium to the CBOs that do participate with the cities. So there's some potential there. So kind of looking for some partners, as well as not just CBOs, but other partners in our area here that can assist with kind of a campaign like this. So I would just say if there's suggestions, drop them into the chat or contact me directly. And then the next steps for us is kind of setting up schedules to kind of have a initial project meeting, and then setting up the schedule for the cohort over the 2022 calendar year. So I think what they're hoping is if we start the cohort in January, that we would actually start an official campaign for solar sometime in maybe April, May, or June, somewhere in there, and then installation starting sometime by the end of the year. So lots of questions, I know, regarding energy efficiency and other issues to be addressed during the cohort. So that's about all I have for the update from OEQ, unless there are specific questions.
Gloria had her hand up earlier.
Gloria.
Yeah, basically I put it in the chat. Yeah, I'd volunteer for the cohort. Just basically saying I would volunteer for anything that had to do with solar in housing, solar in apartments, whatever, solar in buildings. Whatever it is, I'd be happy to help with that.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. And if you have any other suggestions for partners, I'd appreciate that too.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any committee monitoring reports or liaison reports? Air Quality Forum doesn't meet until next week this month. Any old business? Any new business? Any remarks from visitors?
Carol, Marty had a question on the new business, I think it was.
Okay, Marty, please.
I don't know, old or new. We've developed a heater for our composter. The Johnson Sioux composter is not supposed to freeze. And so what we've done is made a kind of a digester, a composter in the ground with half of a IBC tote, 3 foot by 4 foot or something like that, 42 inches by 4 foot. Anyway, and it covers the hole, and you could put leaves on top of it, and it will generate heat. And there's a little ducting system runs it up into under the Johnson Sioux. So we're hoping that will work, and we're continuing to play with this over and over again. So that's about all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Do we have remarks from visitors?
Go ahead. I had a remark come in from Mark Samborski, and he said he's on the phone listening. He can't get on the team app somehow. And his comment was he was at the North of the River Strategy meeting, the environmental gathering information, and only 5 non-city workers attended. And his question is, why?
Mark, if you can hear me, that's a really good question, especially since we had, I think, a few more register than that for that particular one. But we can only do our best to put out the information. We actually met, we went to the District 1 problem solving session, put information out through Northland neighborhoods, we put it out through all of our city channels, and then our climate justice workers and Stephanie put it out through their channels. So I don't know, I guess people want to do something else rather than talk about climate strategies on a Saturday morning, maybe.
I think we're always kind of against the challenge of immediacy. You know,
we are, and I've had this conversation with several people, and one of my questions to them were, if you weren't specifically like really part of this and really involved with this, would you be here on a Saturday morning? And their answer was always no. So I mean, that's just the reality of outreach. And we did get quite a bit of Northland participation online though, so that's good to have as well. But it's really when the rubber's gonna hit the road is when we get the strategies and we start going in and having to implement this stuff. And then we're gonna have to have neighborhood specific meetings for certain projects. And then we'll be hearing a lot more from people when they're directly affected. So, and that's why I'm glad it's kind of nebulous how we're going to get a lot of these strategies done, so we can still continue to grab input from community after the plan is done and as we actually implement the processes. That's all I have.
And we have no remarks from visitors.
Billy's got his hand up.
Just really quickly, would like to, as a KC resident, 6th District, appreciate the AMC taking this step of drafting a letter to the council and city manager, expressing its concerns and opposing this proposal by the city manager to make OEQ anything but its own department. We're at a time where many cities across the country are taking the exact opposite step of this proposal, making offices that are focused on sustainability, climate action, resilience, and also offices that are at the front line of working at the intersections of equity and environment. I think this would be seen by any passerby as a regression from the great course of action that the city has been on for some time, largely thanks to community advisory boards like this one and staff at OEQ, and look forward to continue to support y'all's work on this, and just really exciting that the city is taking steps to work with the Rocky Mountain Institute on some innovative ways to bring renewables to cities. A lot of that going on across the country too, and want to say that I'm sure a lot of other civic groups in the region would love to learn from y'all what you get from that cohort, and support any sort of campaign as cities continue to lead the way in Missouri and Kansas for that matter. So thank you all again for all you do.
Before we go, there was some comment in the chat about referencing the reports that Jerry talked about that you all had done some surveys of other environmental offices in other cities and how they were organized. Is that a report that you all have in a report form, or is that just a survey that you collected over time? Is it a published document, or what have we got?
This is Jerry. The first two that we did, there might be some record of it. They were, one of them, I think the earliest one was probably about 10 or 11 years ago. There was another one about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know that I don't have access to those records now. The latest one that I referred to a couple of months ago, there was very few responses to it, given the time frame that we asked for feedback. I believe I provided that to Andy, the results of that, but it was not
A formal report.
It was not a formal report by any means.
Okay, that's good to know. I would very much like to get that letter to council tomorrow morning. So Andy and Rachel, can you help me do that?
Certainly can.
Okay. I really appreciate all of you participating in the meeting today. And I think that it's important that we continue to offer OEQ our full support. And I think that we need to engage with the economic development planning. You know, there are a couple of things. Bob's not with us today, but he would say that he would like to see innovation be something that would be valued in determining the allocation of city resources. And I don't know how we might factor that in. It's hard to say how you do what has never been done before, but there needs to be space for that in what we're looking to do to respond to the climate situation. Unless there's more business to come before the commission, I would suggest we adjourn. Any more business? Well, everybody, enjoy your evening. Have a pleasant dinner, and we'll talk to some of you next week when we have convened the work group.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy
Good
holidays.
night.